So I'm going to try something new because there are a lot of really good questions here. And we aren't going to be able to ask all of them. So also, just as a side note, this isn't your only opportunity to speak to these people. They want your vote. So take the opportunity when this is over. If your question wasn't asked or wasn't answered, make sure that you go and talk to these people and make them accountable to you and your needs. So I'm going to lump a few together and give everyone a minute to answer these questions. So just kind of take what you can out of them and see what you can do with it, okay? So the first group, what is the difference between gentrification and ethnic cleansing? And why isn't gentrification eliminating Asians from the International District in Chinatown? Also on top of that, gentrification is causing increased displacement, harassment of community businesses, police harassment of local youth. How can the city council help stem this tide and put communities before developers? And what will you do for the homeless?
I'm going to try and cover this. First issue, gentrification. I had mentioned that I worked on some neighborhood plans in the 90s. And of all the neighborhood plans, the neighborhood plan that I really have the most respect for is the Columbia City neighborhood plan. Because when they wrote that plan, they did it in a way that kept small businesses, it kept housing, and it kept people who live in Columbia City in Columbia City. And I think they did a better job, and it was because the community was involved in writing the neighborhood plans. We have a tremendous opportunity now in 2010 revisiting of these plans to make sure that we're building communities in a way that doesn't gentrify. Part of that is making sure we're building more housing so that we can keep the cost of housing down. If we don't meet our housing need, if we don't build enough housing, our costs of housing are going to get sky high, and we're all going to end up moving to Kent and Federal Way. And I want to make sure that we're staying here. How we're going to deal with homelessness, I have long been a supporter of making sure that we have a permanent and dedicated funding stream for community services and social community services and human services, and that's one of the things that I'll be pushing for in the City Council.
Time. Good job, time.
Gentrification will happen unless the city becomes involved in stopping it from happening.
That's right.
And that means that you have to have inclusionary zoning. So if someone's building, you just can't build more housing, because I've seen more housing go up, and it's expensive. You've got to have affordable housing, and that means you have to demand that the affordable housing is included, and that means that the city has to use both the carrot and the stick, but it can't be afraid of using both. And basically, when it comes down to the homeless, they cannot and should not be ignored. When we had winter come and the homeless out in the streets, I said, open up City Hall. And I led the charge of saying, we have empty buildings that are not being used, we should open them up for the homeless.
That's right.
We should not shoot a blind eye towards them.
So, I believe it was David that mentioned earlier that we have a problem in our society that we refer to as institutional racism. And as exciting as it is to have Barack Obama as president, it's naive to think that we've solved the problem of race in our country. And you look at any of the data, whether it's around graduation rates of students, whether it's around housing, whether it's around arrests, drug arrests, incarceration, everything points to the same thing. There's a huge discrepancy based on race. And we need to make sure that that data is out there in the public so that everyone in our city understands, despite who we've elected as president, that it is still a problem in our community. And it's a problem that we can solve, but we're only going to be able to solve it if we know it exists and we put the political will behind it to start addressing it. So that's going to make sure we're investing in affordable housing. That's going to make sure we're investing in pre-arrest diversion programs and other things.
Well, this is an issue of basic fairness. In my long time in real estate, I've worked hard to make sure that the kind of displacement, whether it's just gentrification or economic forces, doesn't push people out who've been the backbone of the community. I grew up in the Central District. My mom bought her house there 50 years ago. And too many people have been forced out, because there was no means by which to get it from grandma or grandpa to the next generation. That's why 7 years ago I made a proposal as a member of the Housing Levy Advisory Committee, something called the Keep It in the Family program, where from generation to generation the city could provide both the resources and counseling, because it disproportionately affects African Americans as the rich cultural history that I grew up with winds up displaced in a diaspora to Kent and Auburn. It didn't have to happen. The city should have had some vision. I'm a little frustrated about it. What I will bring to the city council is a commitment to make sure that we keep those people here who are the backbone and bore the burdens of building this city, and their generations to follow should be here as well.
Time up, good job.
So as not to repeat everything that has just been said, I want to talk about something else, and that is, what do we do with the homeless that are on our streets right now? Over the last 2 years, I've been very engaged with tent cities. I have not only drafted the legislation that allowed them to be in King County, but I actually have gone and spent time with the people that are there. What I know is that everyone who is in tent city is just one paycheck away from being back in an apartment, and all of us are just one paycheck away of being in tent city. And we've got to acknowledge that we are, once again, we are together. We are people that can help one another, and that's what I want to do. And I have, this very evening, I'm going out and will be serving food to people that are on the street. I don't know if you've ever spent any time down on 2nd Avenue, but you will find people wrapped up in blankets like hot dogs. That is completely unacceptable in our community with the kind of wealth that we have, that we allow that to happen.
Ask Bill Gates where the money is.
So not only do we want the affordable housing, the low-income housing that we've been talking about, taking care of the least is what we need to do. My time is up, but I just want to say one other thing. Thank you so much for being here, and please.
The Seattle Times, in explaining why they didn't endorse me, said I would look at too many issues through the prism of the disadvantaged. This is an accusation that I wear with honor, and that is the kind of commitment that I will take as a member of the City Council, to work with and on behalf of those who live on the margins, those who are disadvantaged, those who are homeless, those who lack affordable housing. I've worked on low-income housing and homeless issues for over 30 years in this city. I was one of the advocates that helped to start the very first tent city back in 1990. I'm one of the advocates who convinced the city to put the first housing levy on the ballot in the late 1980s. We need to provide shelter for all. We need to have a permanent site for Nicholsville. I am proposing in my campaign that above and beyond the housing levy, we build 5,000 additional units of low-income housing in our city, that we require one-for-one replacement of low-income housing when it is destroyed by developers, and that we pass an inclusionary zoning law that requires developers to include low-income housing in their projects when they build them. These can make a difference.
All right, everybody, so many more questions, so little time. We're going to have to wrap this up for City Council. Join me, please, in thanking these candidates.
You guys are great. All you
And
guys.
now is the time to cast your vote for Seattle City Council. So go ahead and do that. Someone will be around to collect your vote, and we're going to make a very quick transition to Seattle City Attorney.